we'll just dive right in. You've been in office for nearly 2 years now, and I know you have focused on several important issues, including fighting violent crime and improving public safety, improving the Commonwealth's economic growth, and taking on the opioid epidemic. So I kind of want to start talking about your efforts to address public safety. We've done this with your other colleagues who joined us this morning. As you know, as violent crime continues to become a more pressing concern for the region, programs like Ceasefire Virginia seem to present a way forward. Can you speak about how this program has been effective so far and how you see it evolving in the coming years?
Yeah, first of all, I apologize for the technical difficulties. It was interesting. I got placed on Putin's enemies list, and since then we've had, not surprisingly, a massive increase in cyber attacks, and they are really, really strict. And I can only think that something with the state computer was preventing us from logging in with Zoom, because they don't allow Zoom now on our state computers in the AG's office. So I apologize. And if the audio is not great, we're using my trusty iPhone. So here we are. Yeah, ceasefire was an idea that we had, targeting in 12 cities in Virginia Beach, very, very focused, to address both gun violence and gang violence. And it has two parallel tracks, both prevention, promoting group violence intervention strategies, and working with local communities to reduce violent crime and gun crime, but then also prosecution. If you cross that line, go after the repeat offenders that are using gun violence. One thing that we saw that was happening during COVID is, if you talk to those, and I've met a lot that are both gang investigators and a lot that were previously in violent gangs and emerged out of it, is when you're a teenager, you have this overwhelming desire, overwhelming sense of wanting to belong. And the three best avenues for young people to avoid them going into gang activities from the data is after school sports, after school activities, and after school church groups and meetings. Well, all of those were closed for 18 months during COVID, but the gangs weren't. And so you saw an explosion, I think, of youth gang activities. So putting a lot of resources on one hand on the preventive side, telling young people that there is a pathway not to end in the cul-de-sac of gang activities, but also realizing that when violent crime is overwhelmingly driven by repeat offenders, numerous studies have shown that roughly 3 to 5% of felons are committing over 50% of the violent crime. If you want to lower violent crime, you need to make sure that you don't, or make sure you're not ignoring those 3 to 5% of repeat violent offenders. It is not lost to me that for example, in Washington, D.C., the average arrest record for somebody picked up on a first-degree murder charge, according to their former police chief, is 13 prior arrests. And so we had a desire in Virginia to tackle things a little differently and say, if you're a repeat offender and you're using a gun in the commission of a crime, we're going to prosecute. We're going to hold you accountable. And so that's what we've done. We launched Operation Ceasefire. We've got fully staffed earlier this summer. The preliminary numbers are quite good. We've seen crime and gun violence be lowered in 9 of the 12 targeted cities. We'll have some more data in January, but these are assistant attorney generals that are cross-designated in our U.S. Attorney's Office. We've had great working relationships with our U.S. attorneys in the Western and Eastern District of Virginia, and it's both sharing of information. And when early in my career I was a prosecutor, and I realized that too often when it comes to law enforcement, people get siloed. It's local, it's state, it's federal law enforcement, and we've been a big believer in a collaborative approach on this. And I think we've already seen some great results, but also it's innovative. So one of the things that we have as Operation Ceasefire is going and using digital ads. You can actually, one of the things that drives youth violence is people get insulted and they put what are on YouTube or social media accounts, what are called diss videos. Well, now we can actually target it down to the zip code, even down to the square block where there's been a violent action. Somebody's posting one of these diss videos on YouTube, and we can actually intervene and put one of those kind of YouTube ads that we've all seen them on YouTube. They intervene in the middle of the video that says, listen, violent crime, you're going to do the time. A gun's going to give you a mandatory minimum in Virginia of five years. And so we are now starting to do that targeting, and I think we're going to see some great results. So I think it's both preventive, which I think is critically important to invest in young people, make sure they feel like they have a future, but also make sure for those that are crossing the line, that are victimizing others, that they're being held accountable.
Well, thank you so much. You mentioned being collaborative, and so in that spirit, and sort of tackling all of this, I'm curious, what resources do you think that the business community can help provide to your office to address violent crime? We've
Right.
you talked about this with a few other of your colleagues this morning, and we'd love to hear from you. Some companies who are on either partner with organizations to help provide resources, or they partner with offices such as yours. We would love to hear exactly how we could be more collaborative. And that was actually just a question right before you joined us, and how the business community can really work with you. And if you could even think about even how
Yeah.
universities can be helpful as well, that would be great.
Well, listen, I think the business community can help in several ways, one of which is to financially support some of these amazing groups that do so much to help kids. Later this week, I'm going to be going to Roanoke to present an award to a group called Safe Street, which does an amazing work to help young people literally get off the street, give them a safe place to live, or not to live, but a safe place they can go after school. Boys and girls clubs are amazing. We've done a lot of work with the boys and girls clubs as well, and they are located all over. I know there's several in the DC metro area. The idea is, in that critical period between when young people get out of school and when parents are getting home from work, they have a place to go to. They have a place of, as I said, a place of belonging. And supporting financially those organizations, I think, is a force multiplier. The other, which I think requires more work, but something I'm passionate believer in, is to offer and set up a internship mentorship program at your business. I think it kind of serves two parallel tracks. One, you're investing in a young person who maybe previously had never thought that working in an office environment or working for a business was something really in the cards for them, and really showing them a different path forward. But it also teaches them a little bit about the business community and how hard it is sometimes to meet payroll. And sometimes young people will look at the private sector in a vacuum, and they don't realize, hey, for so many businesses, particularly if they have employees that are going the extra mile, boy, they're going to take care of them. They're going to promote them. If you have an employee that's works hard, has a great work ethic, and is dedicated, you're going to be heaven on earth to keep your employees, particularly in a tight labor market. I think it's really important for a young person to see that as well, that they sometimes have an image of businesses, maybe it's through the media or entertainment, I'm not quite sure, but they have a really distorted view of businesses. Ultimately are about providing a service to people and meeting them where they are and trying to help them. And for them to actually see how business works, I think that's important as well, because somebody that maybe previously had never had an idea of going into the business route and maybe even going to college, they're now suddenly saying it could be that you are investing in the next great American entrepreneur. And as we know, 2/3 of all new jobs created in America are created by the entrepreneur class of small businesses of 100 or less. I think it's a great opportunity to invest in a young person. And maybe you partner up with the Boys and Girls Club. So, you know what, we're going to start a mentorship program through them to have somebody kind of rotate and just shadow us in the office, see how it works. And you never know how you're going to inspire a young person to dream bigger than where they are. And I think that could be a great way. It requires more work than just giving, but I think long term that could have a huge impact.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion. There's so many young people I've spoken to these days who really do have an entrepreneurial spirit, but they, may not know how to get started. Their parents may not have owned a business, and so they're not sure how to do so. And I think you're right in that, helping them build that can help shift their attention from other things. So thank you on that. I'd like to
Yeah.
just shift slightly away from public safety and just talk a little bit about your work as the Attorney General in the Commonwealth. You recently opposed a request from the Toll Road Investors Partnership 2 to increase the toll on the Dulles Greenway between Leesburg and Dulles Airport. I think you argued on the grounds that Virginia commuters deserve protections from unreasonable financial burdens. We heard from General Brown in Maryland how important consumer protection is to him. Can you talk a little bit about your stance on consumer protection and why that's important to you, and a little bit about your decision here in opposing that increase?
Well, I mean, I wear a lot of hats. Every state AG has different parameters and different provisions. And the one thing that my office, we have over 20 different sections of law that report to us, everything from major crimes and emerging threats to civil rights to environmental protection to consumer protection. But what I tell everybody, no matter what unit you're in, what I tell everybody that works for me is I want the mindset to be that we're the people's protector, whether that's environmental, whether that's civil rights, whether that's protecting from criminal misconduct, or if that's also protecting and consumer protection. One of those roles is we have a Consumer Protection Council connected with the AG's office that is supposed to be, and the entire mission is to be a voice for the consumer in front of the State Corporation Commission. And so the way it works in Virginia with the Dulles Green Ray is whenever there is a toll increase, similar to, say, if Dominion Power or a utility wants a rate increase, they have to first get approval by the State Corporation Commission. The voice for the consumers is supposed to be the Attorney General's office. We're supposed to be mindful of that. And obviously, we have seen, while inflation is slowing a little bit, we have seen a huge impact on people's pocketbooks. And obviously, when Dulles Greenway announced they're going to be increasing the tolls anywhere between 20 to 40%, my mindset, our mindset was collectively we wanted to be a voice for the consumers. And that I think that's critically important from our perspective. And that's a role that I take seriously, just like my companion in Maryland and in DC. And I think that's the role and that's the mindset. We approach this as making sure that when that hearing is occurring, that the consumers have a voice at the table during that hearing. I think it's going to be in January in front of the SEC.
Keep in line with the discussion about consumer protection and looking out for the residents of the Commonwealth. I wanted to talk a little bit about a coalition lawsuit that was filed by, I think, 41 attorneys general. It's a bipartisan lawsuit against Meta, arguing that their platforms have caused harm to children's health and that they aren't forthcoming about the risk that their platforms may pose to mental health. Can you talk a little bit about, your office's position on this lawsuit, why you all joined? And, I guess there are probably a couple of tech companies on here, like obviously Uber is on here, hearing a little bit about the balance of the advances of technology with protecting those consumers who use those technologies.
Well, here's a couple of things that we know, and we know from a data point. We know that we have seen an explosion in the last decade of teen depression and teen suicide. At the same time, at least on paper, this should be if you try to measure, I guess, happiness by pure material wealth, this is the wealthiest, most educated generation in American history. They're also the most depressed. And close to 60% of female teenagers in America struggle with feelings of being perpetually sad. 1 out of 3, according to the CDC, teenage girls have had a suicidal thought or an iteration in the last 12 months. Our teens are really hurting right now. So that's the first thing, is we've seen a trend line in the last decade that coincides almost directly with what we've seen with increased social media use. And so what we know is, on one hand, you have federal law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is supposed to ensure that no child under the age of 15 can have a social media account without explicit parental permission. Yet we also know from the data that roughly 45% of every 10, 11, or 12-year-old in the country has a Instagram or TikTok account. And our whole reason for our investigation into Meta is essentially what has already been seen. And on one hand, Meta was testifying in front of Congress saying that they did not knowingly try to target young people to get on their platform. Yet at the same time, we know that they were advertising on children's shows like PBS Kids. And so from I guess our perspective, and we know that from Meta's and some of these tech companies' perspective, they know that if they get a 10, 11, or 12-year-old on their social media platform, they have a client for the next decade plus. That is, and I would argue, and my perspective is, 2 or 3 decades ago, I think our country reacted with deep consternation when we saw that Big Tobacco was using cartoon images like Joe Camel to purposely target children. Why were they targeting children? Because they know if they got a child smoking and a teenager smoking, they had a client for the next several decades. And that's our concern. That's our investigation. That's our lawsuit, is that even though there's overwhelming data that shows increased social media use leads to increased anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts, and the social media companies knew this was the case, they were doing so. And so this goes back to what I said earlier when I said, as Attorney General, I view ourselves as the people's protector. I would say of everything that my office has done, by far and away, the most phone calls, letters, and emails from concerned consumers have been on that issue. Parents right now feel overwhelmed. And what I tell people is, if you hand a child, and if your child has an Instagram, sets up an Instagram or a TikTok account, and it's as simple as just simply going on and clicking a button that says that you're actually 15 when you're actually 10, the day they do that is the day their childhood ends. That's the day their childhood ends. If you ever give them a smartphone with social media accounts with no parental controls and no parental supervision, that's the day their childhood ends. And I think we should be in a position to try to protect the innocence of our children.
Well, I, and I'm sure many on here, thank you for your advocacy in this space. Your colleagues in the region also joined that lawsuit, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of your work with your colleagues in the region. Obviously, Virginia, DC, and Maryland are very distinct jurisdictions, but many of us operate in all three. And so we're always curious to hear from the region's leaders on issues that you all are working on, or issues that you share an interest. Obviously, I know you can't speak on any sort of open investigations, but is there any insight that you can share, any issues or initiatives that you're working on with your colleagues in the region that you'd like to talk about, and
Yeah.
well, collaborate?
Well, the one thing I appreciate about the Attorney General world, maybe a little bit different than DC, which DC, well, I'm not talking about the DC AG. When I say DC, I mean the DC Capitol Hill, which seems to be constantly in a partisan grapple to the death, I guess. Is the AGs can collaborate on a host of different issues, either joint investigations, the Meta, the big tech investigation. I'm on the steering committee. I'm on the executive steering committee with that, along with the Attorney General of Tennessee's committee and the Attorney General of Colorado, Phil Weiser, who's a Democrat. So it's very bipartisan by nature. There's a host of issues we've collaborated on. We just I led a delegation bipartisan delegation of state AGs earlier this year in March that we flew to both Auschwitz and then Israel to Yad Vashem on anti-Semitism. And so there's a host of issues we've been able to work together on. A lot of it is consumer protection related, wisely. Some of it is criminally oriented. I'm a big believer in collaboration. Obviously, crime doesn't stop at the Potomac River. Working together. And so one thing I appreciate about some of the bipartisan organizations that we have in the Attorney General world, whether it's AGA or NAG, the National Alliance of Attorney Generals, is it brings people from both sides of the aisle together, and you're able to kind of have meetings outside of the glare of spotlights. I think maybe that's part of the problem in DC is all the committee hearings other than the intelligence committees are televised. So everybody feels like they have to perform. And it's very, very different when you're able to meet with colleagues, regardless of the background, and say, hey, what are the ideas? What are happening in your state? Whether it's consumer protection or whether it's criminal investigations, it could be, I think, a quite effective way of. I tell my staff all the time that I never think I'm the smartest person in any room I walk into, but I'm smart enough to know when I hear good ideas. And so many of the legislative proposals that I push and different, they come from just meetings where I get good ideas from people, and that's help. And it also helps with lines of communication. I think 90% of life's problems can be traced to either poor or miscommunication, and so having open lines of communications, I think, is important.
Mhm. Well, this is the last question I will ask you because we want to be respectful of your time. As you know, January is coming, and that means the General Assembly will be meeting. I know you have your priorities as an Attorney General, but it'd be great to hear what some of your legislative priorities may be going into the session, what you think the General Assembly is going to tackle, and how that may impact the region's business community. I think there's a few things that we'll be watching, and so I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are on some of the big things that may be coming from the General Assembly and how that may impact the business community.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, what's in the news recently is the Capitol's Wizards move. That's going to be a legislative package that gets through. The governor's advocated for, and I think that's going to get a lot of attention coming our way. And I think it's not necessarily what DC is doing wrong or what Virginia is doing right. The Governor Youngkin is very pro business and has said Virginia is open for business, and I think that there's a reason why not just the Capitol and the Wizards, but a lot of companies are looking at Virginia. Some of it is going to be from a business perspective, playing maybe a little bit of defense. I think that Virginia benefits greatly by being the northernmost right to work state. I think that's been a boon for us. The Governor Youngkin is constantly on the phone and visits to companies trying to get them to locate or expand to Virginia. And I can tell you that's always one of the very, very first questions they ask. What is Virginia's right to work status? I know that any attempt to weaken that right to work status will be vetoed. We'll see if there's some sensible people. I've heard from a lot of business owners in Northern Virginia. They're frustrated by some of the project labor agreements, whether that law has changed. I don't know, given the current constitution of the General Assembly, but maybe there'll be some discussions on that moving forward. I know for me, from my perspective, on the criminal side, two of the things we're going to be looking at, one, pushing for a bill that would allow criminal prosecution for felony homicide for a dealer that laces their drugs with fentanyl. We lost 108,000 Americans to a drug addiction last year. To put things in perspective, we lost 55,000 Americans in the Vietnam War over the course of 15 years. So it's the equivalent of 2 Vietnam Wars every 12 months. If it has touched you, my heart breaks for you. It seems that so many families are struggling with loved ones that are dealing with addiction. If you think it's not affecting your business, it is. It's estimated that 45% of every able-bodied adult that is not working in America today is not working because of addiction. Mm-hmm. So we both want to make sure they get treatment. We've obviously had huge opioid settlements in Virginia, and the Opioid Abatement Authority has had the greatest influx of money for treatment for addiction in Virginia history. But for those dealers that are lacing their drugs with fentanyl, that are killing so many people, we want to make sure they're held accountable. We worked with Homeland Security. There was a huge human trafficking case that was on labor trafficking earlier this year in Williamsburg. That case had to be brought in federal court because Virginia's labor trafficking laws aren't as strong. So you'll see us be introducing a couple of anti-labor trafficking bills, and then obviously we as well are going to be giving additional protections from elder financial exploitation as well moving forward. So we're going to be tackling some things on the consumer protection side, on human trafficking, and on just generally keeping Virginians safe. And we want to make sure that Virginia maintains its fantastic high pro-business ranking as one of the best states in the country to do business. That's both quality of life, making sure crime is low. Crime is now a factor in the business rankings as far as quality of life, and making sure we have the right business environment. I like to say that we want to make sure that the three tentacles of too much litigation, too much regulation, and too much taxation can strangle the life out of our business community. We want to make sure that they are appropriately calibrated so they can go out and they can expand and create jobs and destroy poverty. Because I love to point out that our business owners do more to alleviate poverty than anything I could do in government. You're poverty destroyers. And we want to make sure that you continue to say the most important words a human being can hear in their life, other than hearing the words, I love you, is you're hired. So we want our business owners to continue to be able to say you're hired to more and more people.
Well, Attorney Miyares, it was great chatting with you today. Apologies for all of the tech issues, but I think it was worth the
We got
wait.
it fixed.
It was definitely worth the wait. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me and the Board of Trade and its members. And I will tell you, I think we found your insights to be incredibly helpful. So thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.